When my daughter demanded my pension card as payment for letting me leave the hospital after I saved her son's life, I didn't tell her the card would be worthless once I cancelled it. What I also didn't tell her was that the house she thought was hers actually belonged to me. 3 months later, when her money ran out, she came crawling back, but I had already cut her out of my life forever. My name is Margaret, I'm 62 years old, and I spent 3 years of my retirement being treated like an unpaid servant in what my daughter believed was her own home. It started when Sarah called me crying from Phoenix. She was 20, pregnant, and desperate. She sobbed into the phone that she couldn't do it alone, that David's family hated her, and begged me to come help her. I was living peacefully in Denver with my husband, Robert, after 35 years of marriage. But what mother can ignore her child's tears? I packed my life into boxes and moved to Arizona. What I thought would be a few months turned into 3 years of hell. Sarah had married David straight out of college. No ceremony, just papers signed at City Hall. His mother, Linda, made it clear from day one that Sarah had ruined her son's future. And somehow, I became the family punching bag. Every morning, I was up at 5 a.m. making breakfast. David liked his eggs over easy. Sarah wanted oatmeal. Little Tommy needed his special organic baby food that cost $8 a jar. I did laundry, cleaned, cooked dinner, and put Tommy to bed while Sarah worked on her career, and David traveled for business. The worst part? They acted like I should be grateful. Sarah would tell me when I mentioned being tired that I was so lucky to get to spend time with Tommy, and that most grandmothers would kill for this opportunity. Opportunity. That's what she called me for raising her child while she went to yoga classes. I never complained. I loved Tommy. But I was exhausted, my back ached constantly, and I hadn't had a real conversation with an adult in months. When I tried to call Robert, Sarah would always interrupt, telling me Tommy was crying, asking me to start dinner, or wondering where I'd put the car keys. The morning everything changed started like any other. Sarah had a doctor's appointment, so I offered to take Tommy grocery shopping. He was almost 3, energetic and curious about everything. We were crossing the intersection near Whole Foods when a red sedan ran the light. I saw it coming straight for us. Without thinking, I threw myself over Tommy, shielding his tiny body with mine. The impact sent us both sprawling across the asphalt. Tommy scraped his face on the pavement, but he was alive. I felt something tear in my back and warm blood soaking through my shirt. Less than 10 minutes later, Linda stormed into the emergency room like a hurricane. She screamed, asking where her grandson was, not even looking at me lying on the gurney. She yelled at me, asking how I could be so careless, and swore that if something had happened to Tommy, she would have made me pay for every medical bill. When Sarah arrived, she rushed to the doctors asking about Tommy, then tried to calm Linda down. She told the doctor that her mother-in-law had high blood pressure and was very upset, asking if he could check her vitals. She hadn't said one word to me, hadn't even looked in my direction. That's when a trauma surgeon came striding down the hallway with urgency. He told everyone to move out of the way, explaining that the patient had internal bleeding and they needed to operate immediately. Sarah looked confused, saying that Tommy just had a few scrapes and asking who was bleeding that badly. A nurse came running with surgical consent forms, clarifying that it wasn't the mother-in-law, but her mother who was in critical condition, having lost a significant amount of blood, and that Sarah needed to sign immediately. Linda was sitting nearby holding Tommy, her face twisted with disgust. She said dismissively that I was just being dramatic, claiming I couldn't take care of her grandson properly, and was now pretending to collapse to avoid taking responsibility. Sarah hesitated, then murmured that they should just focus on getting me treated and could discuss everything else later. I lay there feeling like every bone in my body was broken. Even with the pain medication, I could barely speak. Still, I reached for Sarah's hand. I whispered to her not to worry about me, that it was just a quick surgery and I'd be fine, telling her to go stay with Tommy. As they wheeled me away, I saw tears in Sarah's eyes. For a moment, I thought maybe she did care. When I woke up, I was in a hospital room with another patient who told me I'd recovered quickly. I asked where my daughter was. She said she thought her mother-in-law had had a blood pressure episode and that my daughter had gone with her to pick up medication. A nurse came in and told me cheerfully not to worry, explaining it was just a compound fracture with some internal bleeding, and that in about 10 days they'd remove the cast and I'd be good as new. That's when I heard Linda's shrill voice in the hallway. Linda's voice carried through the thin walls as she told Sarah that she needed to have a serious talk with her mother, saying I couldn't keep being this reckless with children. She warned that if something serious happened, she wouldn't let it slide. Sarah's voice, which was always firm with me, now sounded meek as she agreed with Linda, promising to talk to me and make sure I was more careful. Linda's tone got sharper as she complained that David was busy enough with work, and now that I was laid up, who was going to handle the housework? She said I better heal fast because Tommy still needed looking after. The woman in the next bed fell silent. The air became so heavy you could choke on it. I rolled onto my side, trying to hide the tears sliding down my cheeks, but I couldn't shut out what came next. Sarah's voice floated in, soft and resigned, as she assured Linda not to worry because I knew my place. Her place. Those words hit me like a slap. The tears kept falling, soaking into my pillow like everything I had sacrificed for them. Linda strutted into my room and placed a piece of white bread and a bottle of yellow mustard on my bedside table. She announced that she'd made this for me, describing it as simple, filling, and not greasy, telling me to eat it because it was way better than expensive hospital food. The younger woman in the next bed nearly choked on her water, asking in disbelief if Linda was seriously giving me mustard on bread when I'd just had surgery. Sarah actually laughed, telling the woman she didn't know her mom, claiming I loved the stuff and could eat slice after slice. I watched her smile as she shared my supposed favorite meal like it was some charming story. Pain flared through my back, like someone had pressed on my fresh incision. I remembered how Sarah had once begged me, pregnant and sobbing, telling me that when she was pregnant, David's mother had made her eat this 3 times a day, that she couldn't say no, and David defended her, pleading with me to have mercy and come, help her. She had always known mustard on bread wasn't love. It was lazy, meaningless, and humiliating. Sarah touched my arm gently, asking if I liked it, her eyes pleading with me not to cause trouble. Just like back at the house, every time David complained the food was too salty. Every time I didn't sterilize Tommy's bottles enough times. Every time Tommy cried because I let him play too long. She'd give me that same look, yielding, apologetic, silently begging me not to ruin the peace. But this time, I couldn't do it. I told Sarah, my voice weak but steady, that someone who just had surgery shouldn't eat anything harsh, and that white bread with mustard had 0 nutritional value. Her expression shifted from guilt to irritation and embarrassment. Linda let out a sharp laugh, saying it was unbelievable that I'd nearly gotten her grandson killed and now had the nerve to complain about free food. She reminded me not to forget that Tommy was her grandson too, claiming that the fact they hadn't sued me was more grace than I deserved. She spun around and stormed out. Right behind her, David walked in and dropped a stack of papers on my bedside table with a loud thud. David told me these were the hospital bills they'd covered, $8,700, and to make sure I paid them back. He said he'd told the nurses that from now on, all expenses would go directly to me, adding that he assumed I wouldn't want people thinking I was taking advantage of my son-in-law. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened as he walked out without another word. Sarah watched them leave, something frantic flickering in her eyes. She asked if I was happy now, saying that I'd gotten in a car accident while babysitting, and she was the one who had to live with the shame. She complained that I'd pissed off her husband and his mother, asking if I could for once just think about how this affected her. I tried to respond, but a violent cough tore out of me. The pain from my stitched back was so intense that sweat broke out across my forehead. The girl in the next bed rushed over with a glass of water, telling Sarah to stop because I'd just had surgery, and asking if she wanted my stitches to tear. I took the glass with trembling hands and forced the tightness in my chest back down. Then I looked straight at Sarah. I told her that she was always asking me to think about her, but asked if she had ever, just once, thought about me. Her face went blank with shock. I explained that I could have lived a peaceful retirement in Denver, asking who had asked me to uproot my life and move here. I listed how David's shirts had to be hand-washed. Tommy needed special organic food. She wanted spicy meals while he didn't. I described how every day I dropped Tommy off at daycare, picked him up, cleaned their house, did their laundry, cooked every meal, and never got to sit down with a hot cup of coffee. My voice grew stronger as I asked if she knew why I'd taken Tommy grocery shopping that morning, because I couldn't bring myself to leave him alone in the house, not even for 15 minutes. I pointed out that she'd given birth to him, but for 3 years, I'd been living like his mother, not hers. Sarah rubbed her temples, frustration bubbling to the surface as she said she got it, that I was tired, but insisted she was stuck in the middle, and asked if I couldn't see that. Just then her phone rang. She answered without moving away, and the voice on the other end was loud enough to echo through the room. The caller asked when I was going to pay them, how long they had to wait, whether Sarah was coming or not, mentioning they had work tomorrow and didn't have time to sit around the hospital. Sarah turned her back, whispering that she was transferring it now, telling them not to worry, and that she was on her way, asking if they were in the parking lot. She hung up and shoved the phone in her pocket, telling me that if I really didn't want her to end up divorced and struggling with a kid, I should just pay David back, asking me not to blame him because they were barely getting by. She added that my money was going to them eventually anyway. The cup of water was still in my hand. In that moment, I hurled it across the room. The water splashed across her face. I told her to get out, to get the hell out of my sight right now. Sarah stood there stunned, wiping her soaked face and asking what was wrong with me, if I was insane. Maybe I was insane, for letting myself be trampled for 3 years while still hoping someone might care. Still coughing, I reached for the phone by my bedside. My fingers trembled as I dialed the only number I knew by heart. The line rang twice before a calm, steady voice answered. I told Robert it was me, asking him to come get me and take me home. I said I should have listened when he warned me not to stay at Sarah's house, admitting I didn't listen, and now regretted it. Sarah's eyes went wide. She lunged forward to grab my phone, insisting this was my home, and asking what would happen to Tommy if I left. In the scuffle, I accidentally hit the speaker button. Robert's voice rang out loud and clear through the room. Robert told Sarah that she'd run off to marry that man, swearing she'd never come crawling back to them. He asked if she had any idea how much her mother had sacrificed, saying that for me to say I regretted it, he wanted to know what the hell she'd done to break my spirit completely. Early the next morning, Robert called to confirm he and our nephew Jake would pick me up at sunrise. The moment I hung up, hunger I had been ignoring finally made itself known, growling loudly. The young woman in the next bed offered to get me something to eat while she was out with her mother. Once they left, the room fell silent except for my heartbeat. Suddenly, the curtain around my bed was yanked shut, and Sarah dropped to her knees beside me. She told me that I knew her job barely paid anything, explaining that David earned more, but his mother's medical bills ate up half his salary. Her eyes reddened as she asked what would happen to Tommy and to her if I left, wondering how I could stand to watch her try to hold the family together, all alone in a city where she had nobody. Of course I couldn't bear it. It was precisely because I couldn't that I ended up here. I slowly turned my head, avoiding her gaze. I told Sarah that if she still considered me her mother, if there was even a drop of love left in her, she should go home and start packing my things, because when her father arrived tomorrow, I was leaving with him. I paused, then added more calmly that maybe one day, when my back healed and I lost my mind again, I'd come back and play her servant, but right now I just wanted to go home. I reminded her that her father and I had been together for 35 years, and this was the first time we'd been apart this long because of her. Sarah stood frozen, tears suspended on her cheeks, like they'd been shocked into stillness. She whispered, asking if I was really leaving even after she'd begged me like this, wondering aloud if I called myself a mother, but would abandon her to drown alone. I clenched my jaw and stared at her. This child I had protected every day of her life. I told her she was a mother now too, and to ask herself if she was worthy of that title. I pointed out that for 3 years, I was the one who stayed up all night with her son, who used their retirement savings to support her household. I said she'd dumped her child on me and couldn't even say thank you. Sarah shot to her feet, teeth clenched, asking if I really was leaving. I nodded without hesitation. She inhaled deeply, then said, like she'd made up her mind, that I had to leave my pension card behind. She explained she was struggling in a city she barely knew on a salary that was nothing, demanding I give her my card and saying she'd let me go. I stared at her, my throat closing up. She was standing at my bedside, measuring my right to leave against a plastic card and a bank balance. I had raised her to be honest, to work hard, to stand on her own. I got her into Stanford University, sent her money every month. Then, sophomore year, she showed up pregnant with no explanation. I thought she was suffering, so I softened. Increased her allowance from $2,000 to $4,000. Every semester she claimed she was working. I believed her, never questioned it. Not until after Tommy was born did she tell me the truth. David had kept going to school, kept traveling. She had jumped headfirst into marriage without even a wedding ceremony. But now here she stood, not asking how I was feeling, just demanding my money. She told me coldly that if I wouldn't agree, she'd discharge me tomorrow, hide my phone, and see how Dad was going to find me. I said nothing, just nodded and handed her the pension card. Sarah lit up like she'd won the lottery, telling me she knew I'd come through for her. So I'm only a good mother if I give her money. Sarah was a fool. Did she not know a pension is tied to the person, not the card? Once I reported it stolen and got a replacement, what she had was just worthless plastic. But I didn't plan to teach her that lesson. Not anymore. After getting the card, she moved with shocking efficiency. Within 2 hours, all my belongings were packed and delivered to my room. The truth is, I never expected gratitude from Sarah. All I ever wanted was basic respect, but she took every ounce of love I had and wrung it dry. As I settled into Jake's car and watched the hospital shrink in the rearview mirror, Phoenix fading like an old photograph, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I was free. Coming home to Denver felt like waking up as someone new. Robert cooked nutritious meals and hired a physical therapist for my recovery. Within 2 weeks, I was walking on my own. Robert said quietly that we were getting old and that wherever we went from now on, we'd go together. He said it was his fault, that he'd been so angry with Sarah. He didn't want to move with me, but I couldn't abandon her. I gently held his weathered hand, asking if he remembered when he retired. He'd said we'd move to Santa Fe, wondering if he still wanted that. He sighed, saying I could never let go of Sarah and asking what the point would have been of him going alone. I shook my head slowly, telling him I'd let go now and wouldn't look back, suggesting we go to Santa Fe and make it our home. His eyes widened like he couldn't believe it, asking if I meant it, even about Tommy. I nodded, reminding him that Linda had made it clear Tommy was a foster. And as for Sarah, we'd done our duty as parents. She was an adult, and it was time she learned responsibility. We went to the bank together and opened a new retirement account. The old card was permanently cancelled. We booked our long-awaited flight to Santa Fe. With help from retired friends, we quickly bought a small house with a garden. We planted flowers, grew herbs, biked scenic trails through the hills. We joined neighbours hunting for wild mushrooms, laughing when locals told us that the prettier the mushroom, the deadlier it was. One day, at a neighbour's barbecue, it suddenly hit me. These people reminded me of who we used to be. We were once the kind of people who embraced life's chaos instead of hiding from it. In this life, one honest day at a time, I found myself forgetting what Sarah had put me through, until the day my pension payment was due. The phone rang frantically. It was Sarah, her voice panicked and shrill. Sarah asked what I'd done, saying her pension payment didn't come, and the bank told her I'd cancelled the card. Before I could respond, Robert snatched the phone from my hand. Robert told Sarah to listen carefully, explaining that her mother had cancelled that card and opened a new account. He suggested that if she had time to make phone calls, maybe she should use it to find a job instead of hovering over her mother's pension like a vulture. There was silence, then an explosion. Sarah screamed, asking how she was supposed to survive, what Tommy was supposed to eat, calling us both heartless. Robert didn't respond. He just hung up in one clean motion. 2 days later, the phone rang again. This time, it was David. David asked when I was going to pay back the hospital bill, reminding me that they both had jobs. I actually laughed, saying that if he wanted to talk money, we should talk. I explained that after Sarah gave birth, I'd paid $15,000 for her postpartum recovery suite, and that every can of formula, every diaper, every jar of baby food since Tommy was born, I'd bought them. He cut me off impatiently, saying he wasn't talking about that but about the hospital bill he'd covered. I let out a cold laugh, suggesting we calculate what he owed me for 2 years of cooking, laundry, and babysitting, citing the standard rate for a full-time live-in nanny at $6,000 a month. My voice grew colder as I reminded him about the $2,000 I'd given him for that car, mentioning I still had the IOU. When he spoke again, his tone had softened, saying they were really out of options because daycare cost $12,000 a year. I exhaled sharply, telling him to save it and not to call me again, warning that if he harassed me one more time, I'd take him to court for what he owed me. I hung up and immediately blocked his number. The next morning, Robert rented a car and told me he was taking me out for fresh air. We drove to a small town called Taos. It was peaceful, like a place time had forgotten. We stopped at Wheeler Peak. The wind was cold and sharp, the air thin but crystal clear. Halfway up, we took a photo together, framed by endless snow-capped mountains and golden sunlight. It felt like sealing this new chapter of our lives. On the drive back, Robert's phone rang. It was our property manager. The manager told Robert that his daughter had contacted them, wanting them to open our Denver house for her because she said she was back. Robert and I exchanged looks. He glanced at me, waiting. I gave him a firm smile. I asked to speak to her. Sarah picked up sobbing, asking how I could be so cruel, saying she hadn't been home in 3 years and I'd already changed the locks. I laughed bitterly, asking if she had the audacity to say that, pointing out that she'd dropped out of college, thrown herself into a marriage that destroyed her, and was now blaming me for being heartless. She broke down over the phone, telling me she'd left David and was done with him, that she'd brought Tommy back with her. She begged me, swearing she'd listen this time and wouldn't go back to him. I asked, raising an eyebrow, if she'd quit her job. She sniffled, explaining that after I'd left, there was nobody to watch Tommy. Daycare was $12,000 a year and she couldn't afford it. She said David had told her to just quit and take care of the kid, but she didn't have a choice. I rolled my eyes so hard I nearly gave myself a headache, asking if she'd actually quit. Sarah's voice turned resentful through her tears as she said she had no income now, that David's money all went to his mother. They'd been counting on my pension, and then I'd cancelled the card. Her voice rose in desperation as she explained he gave her $20 a day, asking what she was supposed to do with that. She said she'd yelled at him, and he'd told her to get out, so she'd packed up and left with Tommy. I closed my eyes and forced my fury down. Even now, she was waiting for someone to rescue her. I told her to put the property manager back on the phone. There was a pause, then the weary voice of the building manager. The manager asked how I wanted them to handle this. My tone was firm, every word like a nail, as I told them not to open that door, explaining that the house was under Robert and Margaret Brooks's names. We weren't home, and nobody was authorized to enter without us, not even my own daughter. I knew Sarah too well. Give her 5 minutes and she'd be subletting our home or signing away power of attorney. We'd be left holding the bag. I thought the drama was finally over. But a few days later, Sarah's TikTok video went viral. The footage showed a dim, moldy house with peeling paint and broken furniture. Overlaid were photos of Robert and me hiking, smiling under mountain sunlight. The caption read that while her parents vacationed, her child and she spent Christmas in a rotting house. The comments exploded. 2 days earlier, a girl at the local craft market had posted a video of Robert and me making beaded bracelets for tourists, captioning it as the sweetest retired couple with real-life goals. People quickly connected the dots, asking if that wasn't the same grandmother from the bracelet video when her daughter said they were homeless. The judgment started flooding in, with people asking how parents could be so heartless when their daughter was struggling with a kid and they were living their best life. Sarah caught on to the algorithm. She posted again, this time on camera, voice trembling as she claimed she'd never finished college, that her parents had forced her into marriage, then abandoned her. The comment section exploded with people calling us classic narcissistic parents, saying this wasn't love but control, and that we cared more about appearances than family. Then David jumped into the circus. He uploaded a photo of my hospital bill with my name clearly visible. His caption claimed they'd taken all the money, but he'd paid for her treatment, that they were barely surviving, and if their marriage failed, it was because of what we'd done. Robert and I stood outside the train station, each rolling a suitcase. The cold bit into our skin, but our hearts felt strangely light. He looked at me, half smiling, observing that they were back to fighting side by side, noting that if nothing else, they'd finally found common ground. We exchanged a look and laughed. It was tired but free, so we turned off our phone notifications, packed our bags, and caught the next train to Jackson Hole. The mountains were majestic, the snow-covered nights peaceful. We hiked, laughed, and acted like teenagers until New Year's Eve, when we finally made our way back home. We stepped out of the taxi just as it pulled away. I reached for the house key and froze. A sharp voice was screeching from inside our house. Robert's jaw tightened. He whipped out his phone to call the property manager, but before we got a reply, the front door swung open. There was Linda, wearing my down coat, dragging a trash bag, muttering under her breath about that spoiled brat who kept whining about how hard it was, noting how funny it was that her legs weren't tired when she was skipping class to fool around. Threatening to crack open the safe, Robert's face turned crimson as he declared there were thieves in our own family. He didn't wait for backup. He shoved the door open. What we saw inside was no longer our home. David was sprawled on the living room couch playing video games. Sarah sat at the dining table feeding Tommy. But the thing that made my blood pressure spike was the silk scarf around Tommy's neck. My silk scarf, the one Robert gave me for our 30th wedding anniversary. I stormed across the room and yanked it off. Tommy screamed in terror. Sarah looked up with a glance so flat it was nearly blank, saying that, well, look who finally decided to come home. David didn't pause his game, commenting that the house was comfortable and asking about the hospital bill I owed him. I looked around, feeling like someone was carving out my heart. Our wool rug stained with greasy footprints, the coat closet ransacked, my carefully folded clothes used as doormats, my wedding ring on Sarah's finger, Robert's gold watch gleaming on David's wrist. I charged into the master bedroom and flung open the wardrobe. The place had been ransacked. My jewelry box was empty. The gold necklace, the bracelets, gone. David noticed my silence and shoved Sarah, telling her I wasn't talking to him and she should go ask if I was paying up. Sarah walked over and dumped Tommy into my arms, asking if I hadn't seen Tommy in a while and didn't I want to hold him. Tommy screamed, flailing, crying that he wanted Mommy and didn't want the old witch. My jaw clenched. A 3-year-old doesn't come up with witch on his own. I stared into his teary eyes, asking Tommy who had told him I was a witch. He sobbed, trembling, unable to answer. Linda marched up the stairs, clutching Tommy to her chest like a prize, barking that she'd said it. She declared that I owed her son money and was out gallivanting like some shameful old hag, asking what I was if not a witch. I was shaking, literally shaking. Robert didn't wait another second. He pulled out his phone and called 911. Robert told the operator he needed to report a break-in, explaining that his wife and he had just returned after being away and their home had been entered illegally, that clothes were missing, jewelry was gone, and the suspects were still there, confirming they were still inside and asking for someone to be sent immediately. David bolted upright and charged toward Robert, trying to grab the phone and asking what the hell he was doing, calling him nuts. Security from the Homeowners Association arrived first. 2 guards tackled David, twisting his arms behind his back as he screamed that it hurt and to let go. Sarah panicked, grabbing my arm and telling me to stop, explaining she'd brought them there but I'd locked them out and she didn't know what else to do, asking if I was seriously calling the police on New Year's. The community manager walked in behind them, wide-eyed, asking if I was her mom, because she'd told them she was living in an abandoned unit with her kid, claiming she had no place to go. Sarah went pale, saying she didn't know what he was talking about. He snorted, telling me I should know that she'd been live-streaming every day, crying and saying Robert and I had thrown her out, taken all her wedding money, and gone on vacation, and that people had been donating like crazy. My fingers trembled as I opened TikTok for the first time in weeks. Sarah's face was all over it, crying in the dark, calling us heartless parents, lying over and over. My tears dried instantly. I lifted my hand and slapped her across the face. I called her a disgrace. She stared at me with no remorse, no shame, saying all this was because I'd wanted to keep my precious pension card and had chosen traveling over my grandson. Robert stepped forward, his voice cracking as he shielded me and grabbed the broom by the door. He slammed it at Sarah's feet. Robert asked if she thought her mother's life belonged to her, that just because I loved her, I owed her my retirement, free childcare, a roof over her lazy husband's head. His voice broke as he asked where all this fire had been when David humiliated her, when his mother treated her like dirt, pointing out that the only reason she ever dared this was because I'd loved her too damn much. I stood in the wreckage of what used to be our home. The rug, the scarf, the gold watch turned into trophies for people who saw our love as weakness. I said, cold as steel, that if I'd known she'd turn into this, I would have chosen not to be a mother at all. Linda spat from the doorway, that fine. I could believe that, but I'd better pay what I owed, demanding I hand over that pension card to Sarah or not blame them for what happened next. I sneered, telling them they weren't going anywhere because they'd broken into our home. I sneered, telling them they weren't going anywhere because they'd broken into our home, stolen from us, and would be explaining themselves to the police. The cops finally arrived. Linda and David were both cuffed and escorted to the cruiser. Even in handcuffs, David was yelling that they were the victims, that this was a setup, that we were framing them. I whispered to myself that he should wait until he saw the lawsuit and evidence list, wondering how loud he'd be in court. Once everything was done, Robert and I couldn't bear to sleep in what was left of our home. We checked into a small hotel a few blocks away. Exhausted, heartbroken, but finally done. The next morning, we hired a professional cleaning crew to disinfect and restore the house. We submitted a full inventory of losses to the police. Sarah sat on the couch holding Tommy, blank-eyed and silent. She finally spoke, her voice small, asking if I'd really had David and his mom arrested, pointing out it was 5 days till New Year's, and everyone else was cooking and decorating while they were like this. She wondered what she was supposed to tell people, that she'd brought them there, given them keys, and now they were in jail, asking if anyone was to blame. Why hadn't I just had her arrested too? I looked up, my tone level, asking if she really believed that. She nodded slowly. I told her that was good because that was exactly what David and Linda had told the cops, that she'd orchestrated the whole thing. I explained that the only reason she wasn't in a cell was because we'd asked them to spare Tommy, but since she was so eager to go, I'd take her there myself. Her face turned ghost white as she asked if I was kidding, wondering if it wasn't that serious. I didn't respond. I just stared at her. For the first time, she seemed to realize she had gone too far. Maybe it was years of Robert and me spoiling her that made her believe our love came without boundaries. That no matter what she took, no matter what she said or did, we would always cave. But this time, I was done. I opened my phone and started recording. I introduced myself to the camera as Margaret Brooks, explaining that viewers might have seen some videos online that painted me as a heartless mother, one who left her daughter and grandson in a cold, broken house while she went off to enjoy life. I said I wanted to set the record straight. My voice was calm, but every word landed like a hammer. I explained that my husband and I had given everything to our daughter, that from the day she was born, we'd worked and saved to put her through Stanford University, never asking for anything in return, just hoping she would build a good life of her own. I described how, in her sophomore year, she'd vanished for months, and when we finally found her, she'd already given birth in her boyfriend's house with no warning, no explanation, just tears and a desperate plea for us to come help. I paused, emotion thickening my voice. I declared that this time I wouldn't stay silent and wanted to make something crystal clear. As of today, Robert Brooks and I no longer recognize Sarah as our daughter. I said that if she had any conscience left, she'd understand that parents are not ATMs, and love does not mean endless exploitation. The video spread like wildfire. Comments poured in expressing shock at the real story, asking how someone could ignore their mom's car accident and demand money after surgery, calling her and her family monsters. Sarah's livestream account was permanently banned. The same followers who once cheered her on turned vicious, calling her a fraud, a parasite, a manipulative liar. I also submitted David's handwritten IOU to the authorities. He was ordered to pay full restitution for the break-in, plus the $20,000 loan I gave him for that car. Even David's father was dragged out from hiding to keep his son from catching a criminal record. He sold his SUV and mortgaged their townhouse just to cover the fines and repay the damages. The next morning, David went right back to Sarah. And of course, my fully awakened daughter packed up Tommy and followed him like a duckling. Before leaving, she stood outside our front gate and hurled one last threat, saying that I hadn't helped her when she needed me. So when I was old and gasping for air, I shouldn't expect her to hesitate pulling the plug. Robert and I didn't flinch, not a twitch, not a single flicker of emotion, because we finally understood. Cutting ties with family isn't a speech you make. It's that exact moment when even their ugliest words don't deserve a reply. After the new year, we sold the old house and boarded a flight to the West Coast, settling into a sun-drenched cottage in Santa Barbara. This time it was for real. We weren't coming back. But peace didn't last long. My phone started buzzing with harassment calls, lewd messages from strange numbers, and even obscene photos I wouldn't dare describe. We filed a report with the police immediately. The officers traced the IP addresses. All the accounts were linked to one city, the same one where David lived. Just as we expected, a direct message popped up in my inbox from him, threatening that I should feel the heat, claiming he'd make sure there was no corner of America safe for me. I didn't flinch. Instead, I gathered every screenshot, every voicemail, and every filthy image, printed them, bound them, mailed the whole package to HR at David's workplace. He was so proud of his government job, so I took a hammer to it. Not 2 days later, we received confirmation that David had been terminated for inappropriate conduct and distribution of illicit content, and that his employer was filing a civil claim against him. Robert and I were sipping coffee on the deck of our coastal rental when we read that reply. The sea breeze on our skin, sun warming our shoulders, justice in our hands. It was glorious. We traveled to Lake Tahoe next, spent our mornings watching fog roll across the water, our evenings feeding seagulls as they skimmed the lake surface like ballet dancers. Life felt like a painting until Robert's phone rang. He put it on speaker. From the phone came Sarah's panicked, cracked voice, nearly screaming. Sarah's voice came through telling us that David had gotten fired, that his mother had had a stroke, that they'd lost the house, the car, everything, asking if we were really going to just watch them fall apart. Neither of us said a word. Silence did the talking. We didn't call back. We didn't respond. After we hung up, I understood something I hadn't before. Not all blood ties are worth keeping, and not every title, like mother, is meant to weigh on your shoulders forever. We changed our phone numbers, moved to a quieter mountainside town. Our neighbors were mostly retired folks, people who appreciated stillness, who didn't demand dinners or shame you for moving slowly. That spring, the community hosted a senior tea circle. The host asked us each to write a blessing to our future selves. Mine was about finally learning not to lose yourself for the sake of someone else. Robert asked if I was free now. I smiled, telling him I was deeply, completely free. We never spoke of Sarah again. When you spend a lifetime centering others, you eventually forget where you are in the story. But even if it comes late, it's still worth it. The time we have left now belongs to us. To Robert, to the sun, to the lake, to the forest, and to the version of me who survived the storm. Because the bravest decision I ever made wasn't to forgive or to wait. It was to never bow for anyone again.